Welcome to the Vocal Lab. This show aims to pull back the curtain on the entertainment industry and give up-and-coming artists some of the knowledge that veterans wish they'd had when they were just starting out. Sort of a music industry primer, if you will. I could sing before I could talk, and I started working professionally as a singer and voiceover actress at the tender old age of 3. Now, I'm a singer, voice, performance, and growth coach. For over 25 years, I've worked with shy hobby singers, super talented artists signed to record labels, working on big screen productions, coming to me from world-renowned producers, and everything in between. I'm Sarah Ramsey, and it's my calling in life to help artists develop their instrument and their craft while giving themselves permission to become people they love, creating joyful lives and fulfilling careers with their own personal brand of magic. Whether you realize it or not, you know Jim Vallance. Or at least you know his songs. When Jim Vallance saw the Beatles on television in 1964, at age 11, it was a life-altering moment. Swept up and inspired by the British invasion, he begged his parents for a guitar or a drum kit, and he got both. Fast forward 60 years, and as a musician, producer, arranger, and songwriter, Jim has collaborated with artists as diverse as Bryan Adams, Heaven, Summer of '69, Run to You, Aerosmith, Deuces Are Wild, Ragdoll, Heart, What About Love, Michael Bublé, After All, Tina Turner, It's Only Love, and Ozzy Osbourne, Walk on Water. Additional collaborations include Tom Jones, David Foster, Alice Cooper, Joan Jett, Joe Cocker, and Rod Stewart, to name but a few. Jim won the Juno for Composer of the Year for 4 consecutive years, 84 through 87, and he is an inductee to the Order of Canada and the Canadian Songwriters Hall of Fame. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Thrilled to have you here with us.
Wow. Nice to be here. Thanks, Sarah.
Well, as we were just saying before we started recording, our family history goes back a very long way.
It does indeed. Yeah.
Yes. So do you want to tell us your story briefly for our listeners who might be meeting you for the first time today? A little bit about who you are and your journey in the biz and how you kind of got where you are today?
Well, you pointed to that date in 1964. I mean, music wasn't on my radar at all. My parents weren't musical. There was really no musical in the house. My mom would have the radio on in the kitchen, and that was about it. I was 11 years old. I was interested in insects. If you had asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, it would have been an entomologist. I wanted to study insects. And then I'm watching TV one Sunday night, and the Beatles, and it just blew me away. And from that moment, I just kept asking my parents, can I have a guitar? Can I have a drum kit? And it took a while, but they delivered on both, bless them. And then I was off and running. I was in bands in high school, playing weekend dances, that sort of thing. Started trying to write some songs around the age of 14, 15, tried my first attempt at sort of writing. Nothing to really remember, but it was a start. And then kind of the rubber hit the road. So grade 12, I'm graduating, and my parents, to their credit, had sort of tolerated and supported my musical interest all through high school. But now it's time to go to college. And I said, I don't want to go to college. I want to be a musician. And my parents were horrified. It was like, well, you can't do that. You can't make a living at it. And I said, well, some people do. And my mom said, yeah, but they're good. And I was like, oh, I mean, I was so deflated. Anyway, long story short, we reached a compromise. I said, okay, I will go to university, but only if I can study music. So we were living in Cranbrook at the time. It's what 1,000 miles from Vancouver. So I went down to UBC, living in residence. I'm 18 in the music program. And probably the first 1 or 2 days that I was in Vancouver, I started asking around in the music department, does anybody know anything about who's in bands or recording studios? And there was one student who was older than me, who had a job at Studio 3, which was corner of Arbutus and 12th downstairs. I don't know if you remember. It might be a little before your time. Well, yeah, this is 1970. Anyway, a long story short, I got an unpaid job at Studio 3. I was just the guy that went for coffee, wound up the cables at the end of the session, and sat in the back corner of the control room, waiting for somebody to need a cup of coffee or something. And so I'm sitting back there, and there was a jingle session, GGRP. Your dad, Miles, and Griff and Howie and Hoot. And I was, observing keenly, learning every day. But one day, after all the musicians had left, they're doing a mix. And one of them said, "Oh, gosh, you know what? We forgot to do that one drum fill." And I said, from my back corner, I could do that. And they turned around and looked at me. I'm sure like they were seeing me the first time and went, "Huh?" And anyway, I went out and did the drum fill to everyone's satisfaction. And it didn't get me any session work immediately, but fast forward 4 or 5 years, and I was, one of the first called drummers for your dad's jingle company. And I worked like almost daily all through the mid-70s to the mid-80s. And then, I'm getting a little ahead of myself here, but long story short, I met Bryan Adams, and he and I started writing songs together. He was 18, living with his mom. And
he was also singing jingles at that point, right?
He was singing jingles too, yeah. So he and I started hanging out and just, wrote songs every day that no one was interested in hearing. So we had sort of 5 years of hard work with nothing to show for it, but we really believed, and we just kept doing it. And then, eventually Bryan did get some notice, and the rest is history. But that was sort of my humble beginning, just from playing in bands in high school to, that opportunity to work for free at Studio 3 and meet your dad and the other members of GGRP, and just kind of work my way slowly into the Vancouver music business, and then met Bryan, and the rest of my career followed.
Yeah. It's, I think that period of time with, in the 70s and 80s in Vancouver, and, Little Mountain, when that was built and all of that was, just a little magical pocket of time there.
It really was. Vancouver was a destination. Aerosmith and Bon Jovi and AC/DC. Everyone came here because the creative scene was just so robust, and so much talent and energy here. I was so grateful to be part of that.
Yeah. No kidding. Did you see because I think you had a little moment in it, the documentary that Squire Barnes just did about Little Mountain? I
haven't seen the whole thing. I just caught the tail end of it, but a friend sent me a link, so I'm going to watch it from the beginning. I was supposed to participate, but a lot of it was done during or just after COVID. And Squire wanted me to fly out to Vancouver, and I was in New York and afraid to fly. I didn't go.
Don't blame you.
For 3 years, I didn't go on a plane, a train, a bus, a taxi, a restaurant. Nothing. So I'm sorry. I would have loved to have participated, but sorry I didn't get a chance to.
No. I had thought that there was a shot of you telling a story in that, but
there might be. Maybe there was some archival footage that he used, but
maybe.
Yeah, but I wasn't able to get out there.
Yeah.
For it. No.
Here on the Vocal Lab, we aim to kind of shine a light into the music industry through the lens of what I know now that I wish I'd known then. With that in mind, if you were starting your career over again, is there anything you would do differently?
Gosh, I think school fails us in a few ways. It's great to learn to add and subtract and read and write and a few things, but it doesn't really prepare you for real life. Yeah. I wish and this is, sort of an aside, I wish I had learned, taken home ec and learned to cook in school or things like that. And there are schools now, there are music business courses. But back in my day, you were on your own. You just went out into the world, especially if you wanted to be a musician. Get used to starving, first of all, until you can, get a job that actually pays enough to pay your rent.
I don't think that's changed.
Yeah, but I mean, I was just on my own back then, and played clubs, weddings on the weekend, bowling club dances, bar mitzvahs, and then the thing that I really wish I'd known then is when I started songwriting and started getting my songs recorded. My very first recording was a Canadian band called Prism in the mid to late 70s. And I was the main writer in that band. So we got a record deal, we made a record, and the record was about to be released. So we were like weeks away from an actual release. And I don't want to name names here, but the producer one day, we're in the control room and the album is pretty much finished, and he slides a piece of paper in front of me and says, I need you to sign this. And I said, oh, what's this? He said, well, the record company needs this. I went, oh, okay. I didn't even read it. I just signed it. With that one stroke of the pen, I signed away my publishing, which is 50% of the income from those 7 songs. It was only for that one album. But that was a huge blunder. And, my fault. I blame the other guy a little bit, but, I didn't know what I was doing. So that was a big lesson. And sometimes the best lessons are the ones that are learned hardest. So I didn't make that mistake again. But I point to that as an early, I wish I knew then what I know now, Yeah.
Well, and shame on the unnamed person there for sort of leading you down the garden path without a proper explanation too. Because, but I mean, to his credit, happens.
He made it up to me a few years later by getting me on a big session. But anyway,
Yeah. And in the same vein, what would you do the same if you were starting all over?
You know what? If I had never had success, I'd still be doing it. It's just passion. You got to love it. You got to really love it and really want to do it and not have any expectations of success. Just do it because you love it. And I still love it. And so that hasn't changed at all. And I wouldn't change a thing about that.
Yeah. Now, you sort of springboarded onto this a second ago, but we are in an industry that sees like all sorts of different levels of music education specifically. And I know people feel a lot of different ways about that. Some people you need a lot of education, and some people think that education gets in the way, in pop music, and because it's not from the heart, it's too theoretical. And so what has your experience been in terms of your music education, and how has that affected your career or come into play in your career?
Well, gosh, I mean, as I said, there was no real music in my house before the Beatles came on TV, but that's not exactly true. I did have piano lessons when I was 7 or 8 years old. I hated it. It was not fun. The teacher was a little bit harsh, but that said, I'm so glad that I had that, because when music did become an interest, somewhere in the back of my head, I had a few skills. And then later on, when I went to UBC for music school, I only went for 1 year, but, I learned theory, composition. There were things in there that, some of it was of no use to me later, but, again, everything that goes in stays in. And at some point it's useful. But speaking of sort of education or over-education, I remember sitting in my theory class, might have been 20 of us, a professor at the front. And I remember an exam one day where, the paper's upside down, and then it's like, okay, 3, 2, 1, turn it over. And you turn it over. And it was a sheet of music paper with, I think, 30 chord clusters. And you had like 20 minutes to name them all. So I'm going, okay, C major 7 over 3. Okay, next. And I look over, and there was another student in our class. His name was Vance. And he went, jump, 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 jump. And then he was done. I just went, oh man. I thought, I don't have a chance. He was so good and so smart. But you know what? And I don't want to disparage him in any way, but because this is honest work. But years later, he was teaching piano at a sort of country club for rich kids, and had never. And again, please, I'm not disparaging him, but that was, as far as he progressed in the music business. So he had enormous talent and ability, but it's also. I mean, let me go further. So my first band before Prism, my first really, really good band was called Sunshine. And we were a jazz fusion band. And they were really good players. In fact, if there had been a vote taken, I would have been voted least likely to succeed, because these guys were so freaking good. All of them were amazing players. But I think some of them knew too many chords.
Yeah.
So I think overeducation, and that might even been what you were referring to a minute ago. I think overeducation can be a deficit. It can, and pop music is simple. It should be simple.
Yeah.
And gosh, Bob Dylan did so much with 3 or 4 chords. So I think you can know too much. A long answer to your short question, I think you can know too much.
Well, and I do think it's somewhat genre specific too. Like
of course, yeah.
I went to school. I went through a jazz program. I have never worked in jazz, and that was never my intent. It was just the most applicable program that was available at the time, because it was that or UBC, which for those who don't know, that's a classical program.
Yeah. I think your mom went there, didn't she?
My mom went to UBC. Yeah. She was there. Bill Henderson went through that program. Probably you guys were all there kind of around the same time.
Yeah, they were a little ahead of me, but yeah.
And so I went through a jazz program, but I've never worked in jazz, nor did I ever intend to. But all of that, jazz theory and the deep knowledge there, that's great if you're a jazz guy.
Truly, yeah.
You do need it in that genre, but in pop music, it is a simpler form of music. It's not supposed to be super complicated.
Yeah.
Yeah. What have been, and I'm going to preface this by saying I'm not necessarily asking you to name names. I'm really more talking about just the relationship part of it.
Yeah. Okay.
But you can answer however you'd like. What have been the most important relationships in your career? Personal, professional, whatever, but that have felt like they've made a difference in the trajectory of your career, or,
Oh gosh, well, I'd have to name names. I mean,
as you wish.
Yeah, I mean, your dad. That was school. Let me tell you, doing those jingles, playing on them, writing them, arranging them. The bar was very high. Those guys were really serious about what they did. And as you know, like world renowned, people came from all over the world to have, their jingles done by GGRP. Yeah. So I'm very grateful for that connection. Bruce Fairbairn, he and I were in the band Sunshine together. And then he went on to, produce Aerosmith and Bon Jovi and others. And then he pulled me into those sessions. So I got to write some stuff with Steven Tyler and others. So that was a very, very, very helpful connection. He was very generous. Bryan Adams. Yeah. Ran into him in a music store when he was 18. I was a bit older. I think I was 23. And we just clicked immediately. The first day we got together, we wrote a song, and another one the second day, and another one the third day. And You know what? What's the date today? January 11th. 2 days ago, January 9th, was the 45th anniversary of me running into Bryan. So,
wow.
So that's how long we've been doing it. And he's like my brother. And then it's exponential after that. Like, once you have a little bit of success, the guys at the record companies, look at the fine print and go, who was involved in that song? Oh, Jim Vallance. Okay. And then your phone starts to ring, once a month and then twice a month and then once a week and then twice a week. And it's just exponential. So as long as you can keep up, keep being creative and keep delivering to a high standard, you can have a career. So, and every connection is helpful, but you also have to, there's a phrase I like to use because some people I worked with on the way up who kind of stalled halfway. Mm-hmm. What I used to say about them was they never missed an opportunity to miss an opportunity. You have to know when something is right in staring you in the face. Like, you have to recognize opportunities and then jump on them and just stay focused and deliver. And it's hard work. I mean, there's no easy way. No, songwriting is not easy. It's really hard work. So and you also have to be, have a thick skin, be able to take rejection, humiliation, because lots of times people aren't going to like your songs. Yeah. And you can either quit or try harder.
Yeah. Now, you began your professional career, as you said, in the band Prism, but you were not just the principal songwriter, you were also the original drummer in that band as well, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you worked under a pseudonym.
Yeah, I know. well, in Sunshine, the band that preceded Prism, we all gave ourselves silly nicknames. Yeah. The bass player, Richard Christie, was Eddie Dexter. Peter Baring, the piano player, was Captain Bullweevil. And I took the name Rodney Higgs. Don't even ask why. I don't even remember. So when we morphed into Prism, I just kept my name. Yeah. My Rodney Higgs. It was silly. And you asked earlier about the things that you wish you had done different. I wish I hadn't done that, but it's too late now. Can't recall all those albums with Rodney Higgs on it.
And then, do you want to talk about the process, how you transitioned from working as a drummer, like as a player, to working full time as a songwriter and sort of pulling back from playing?
Yeah, well, for starters, I did, after the Prism album was released, I did one tour with the band. Mm-hmm. And, first albums are humble. You're out there. We were opening for Foreigner, opening for Heart. 5 guys in a rental car eating microwaved burritos from gas station kiosks. Staying at Motel 6 and sharing a bed. It was not fun. And so I did one tour, and I thought this is not for me, and decided that I would rather stay home, sleep in my own bed, and write songs. Mm-hmm. And songwriting also takes time. When you're in a rental car with 5 guys, you're not writing, Yeah. So I needed the time and the space to do that. So that was the main decision. I just did not like touring. And after that, never joined a band again and just spent the rest of my adult life in a room with no windows writing songs.
I think that's a thing that people who are not inside the industry maybe don't realize, is that there's a reason that album and touring cycles happen the way that they do, because exactly what you just said, writing and touring don't happen at the same time. There's not enough hours in the day or creative space really to do both consecutively.
It's tough. It can be done. Gosh, the Beatles did it. They were touring constantly and writing in hotel rooms. And then the record company would say, "Okay, we need an album," and they'd have a week off the road to do an album. I don't know how they did it. It's remarkable, but you're right. It does need time and space.
Yeah. So not impossible, but it's not the most conducive environment for that to be happening. Yeah.
And then the Beatles decided to stop touring in 60. They did their last concert in 66, and then it was on to Sgt. Pepper and Abbey Road and albums that really did take and needed time,
Yeah. Yeah. Do you want to talk a bit about your songwriting process?
Sure. It's never the same twice. Every song is a new journey. I don't have any real formula or template. With Prism, the songs on that first album I wrote on my own. But then once I met Bryan and loved the idea of writing with another person, then for the rest of my career, it was all collaborations. So, Bryan, Steven Tyler, Ozzy Osbourne, Alice Cooper, hundreds, in fact.
The list goes on.
Yeah. And then if there was any process at all, it was just kind of do your homework. If you're like, there's been times when I wrote with Ozzy one week and Michael Bublé the next. So, the
Those
change
are
of
very
gears.
different ends of the spectrum.
Yeah. So you got to change gears, and be very cognizant of kind of, okay, Ozzy's music sounds like this and Bublé's music sounds like that. And, not that you want to revisit their past, but you do have to kind of get into their heads. And the other thing is, to make a living as a songwriter, whether it was the old business model, back when people went to the store and bought vinyl, or the new business model where people download from Spotify, the same thing holds true. You write a song, it gets recorded, it gets released, people pay for it, and then eventually you get paid. So if you write a song that doesn't get recorded, then you're not going to pay your rent. So you have to, like, if there's going to be 20 songs written for an Aerosmith album and only room for 12, you got to make sure that you write one of those 12 and do that again and again and again and again for your whole career. So there's a bit of a game to be played, but it's just being smart. In fact, back to my, least likely guy to succeed in Sunshine Band, I knew back then I was not the most talented guy in the band. So I thought, if I'm not the most talented, then I'm going to have to be the smartest. I'm going to have to figure out how to take what I can do and be smart with it. So, I just learned how to use those 3 or 4 chords that I did know and try and make magic with that. So there's some smarts involved. And I don't mean, I'm not saying I'm intelligent or a genius. I just, learned to kind of how it works, what's required, and just applied myself to that.
Well, you certainly have made some magic.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. And I mean, you talk about writing with different people and it really, as a career songwriter, having to navigate those. Are there any more specific sort of considerations that you give when you're, like, how do you prepare, for instance, to work with an artist? Do you go in familiarizing yourself with their body of work first, or what is your sort of process to prepare to work with an artist?
I mean, some artists like Aerosmith, for example, I was already familiar with. Yeah. I'm not deep cuts, but certainly with their hits. So before they arrived at my studio, I did listen to their previous work, and then when they arrived, I mean, I was a fan. So there's also that sort of pinch me moment where Steven Tyler and Joe Perry walk into your room. Yeah, and you've never met them before, and you can't let them know you're kind of freaking out. So then there's that moment of kind of meeting them and sitting down and chatting and getting to know them a little bit. I mean, we just got some tea and cookies and sat down and talked for probably an hour before we picked up our guitars, and just. It was really helpful. We discovered that, we had mutual influences and mutual love for the Stones and Zeppelin and the Beatles. And we talked a bit about our children, and we just found a bunch of common ground, and then when we did pick up our guitars, it was, I'd only known them for an hour, but it kind of felt more like we knew each other. Yeah. And so there's all kinds of things to navigate. I mean, they were easy because they were really nice guys. Joan Jett was a challenge. I mean, she's really sweet, but she's really shy. And it was really hard to kind of crack the armor, you know?
Yeah.
So the first few hours were a little bit awkward, and I'm trying to, you know, figure it out. And then my son was maybe 2.5 or 3. And my studio was in my basement at the time. So he would come downstairs and, I was working. And so he came into the room, and I said, his nickname was Geeks. I said, Geeks, this is Joan Jett. He goes, hi, Joan Jett. and she just melted, you know?
Yeah.
And from then on, it kind of broke the ice. So,
yeah,
whatever it takes.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you approach? So actually, let me back up there. When you're writing with somebody, are you writing the sort of chords and melody, and they're writing lyrics, or is it more like a shared, or is it the same every time? Does it differ artist to artist?
Well, yeah, it definitely differs artist to artist. Like Ozzy Osbourne doesn't play an instrument, so I was. What I used to like to do, I mean, when drum machines came along, you could just sort of, you'd say, you want to write a ballad, mid-tempo, up-tempo? You could sort of talk about it first, like, you know, and in some cases, I would be at the end of the writing process. So the artist might have already written a bunch of songs, and they were partway through an album, but they needed, record company might say, we need a ballad, or we need an up-tempo. So sometimes they would come to me with a specific kind of song they were looking for. So say it was a ballad. So I'd dial up a tempo on the drum machine, and then either sit at the piano or pick up my guitar. And so you've kind of got a little bit of a vibe going rhythmically, and then you're just fishing. It's just like, you know, if I knew where it came from, I'd explain it, but it just kind of falls out of the sky. Once you have your guitar in your hands, kind of your fingers just kind of find things, and the other writer might say, well, that sounds good. And then the next thing you know, you've got like 5 seconds of something, like a little snippet, and then you just grow it. Sometimes if I had enough time between projects, I would not only listen to what they had done, but I would actually put together some things ahead of their arrival, like just little ideas that I thought might be helpful. And sometimes that worked. You got to start somewhere. So you either start from scratch, or you have a little thing. Or sometimes the other writer would come with like a little tiny thing. Yeah, I remember. I mean, along those lines, I remember. And there's a whole longer story here too. But the group Heart from Seattle, I wrote one of their hits called "What About Love," and that song started. So that was 1985. I actually wrote it in 1982 with another band, a Canadian band in Toronto. And this was one of those things where there was 20 songs, only room for 12. And What About Love didn't make it. It was song 13 or 14. So it ended up not going on the album, and I actually forgot about it. I literally forgot about the song. So 3 years goes by, and I get a call from Capitol Records in LA saying, congratulations, you've got the first single on the new Heart album. And I went, what song is that? And they said, What About Love? I went, really? So the song had found its way through a publisher to Capitol Records, and they sent it to Heart, and they recorded it. And I didn't even know. But the story I was going to tell is, when I wrote it with this Canadian band, I got together with them one night. I went over to their house. The guitar player, there were 2 guitar players in the band, a guy and a girl, and they were a couple. So I went over to their house. We had dinner, went downstairs to their basement to write something. And a lot of times you sit with the other writers and you say, you know, have you got anything? You know? And I said, I've just got this one idea. I got a title, and it's like one note. I said, you know how, you know, the Beatles was one note. All you need is love. Just that one note. I said, I got this idea. What about love? I said, that's all I've got. Just, you know, one note and that phrase. And like 2 hours later, we had the song. So it started that humbly. Yeah. So it doesn't take much, you know, and it's so much I mean, the perfect analogy is just planting a seed and then a bit of fertilizer, a bit of water, a bit of time and nurturing and it grows.
Yeah. Yeah. I think when you're co-writing with somebody, there has to be a real sense of trust there, because you have to be able to be vulnerable with the other person to throw out ideas that somebody might go, nope. Right.
Yeah.
So there's that, you have to be willing to take those risks, and that can be a really uncomfortable place to live. For some people, that can be very uncomfortable. And I'm just curious sort of what your experience is with that, being someone who has made your career out of living in that space.
Yeah, well, like I said earlier, you have to be ready for that. You have to have a thick skin and trust. Absolutely. I mean, my relationship with Bryan was all about trust.
Yeah,
it was no ego, just the best idea wins. And never once in 45 years have we argued about, I wrote one more word than you, so I get 51%. It was we split everything 50-50. Sometimes I contributed more, sometimes he contributed more.
Mm-hmm.
But I can remember one or two times with writers where I'd say, what have you got? And I'd pick up my guitar and I'd play something. So what do you think about that? No, don't like that. Okay. What do you think about this? No, I don't like that. And that kind of went on for a while. So I said, because I thought each of the ideas were kind of, worthy. And I said, let's just record it. Like, I had a cassette machine always ready. And so I just put a few little things down. And the entire first day, usually I would spend a week with another writer. And the first day was kind of like that, the whole first day. And I was like, oh God, this is going to be a rough week. But everything we had done on the first day, some of them were like 10-second or 20-second little snippets. I recorded everything. Mm-hmm. And he came back the next day and I said, why don't we just listen to what we did yesterday, for starters? And I played everything we'd done the day before. And he went, whoa, he liked a lot of it. Mm-hmm. And I learned something from that. Yeah. And the analogy is, how sometimes after Thanksgiving dinner, after it's spent a night in the fridge, it actually tastes better the next day.
Yep.
Leftovers. Yep. I mean, sometimes you just need a bit of space.
Yeah.
And so that was a strategy I learned. So after that, I recorded everything, every little snippet. I've still got boxes full of tapes. Actually, let me tell you a story. So I wrote a song, a bunch of songs with Aerosmith, but there was one in particular we wrote in 1991. We wrote it, we demoed it, and then it was one of those songs that, there was 20 songs and only room for 12. So that was another song I kind of forgot about. But there are Aerosmith fans and Ozzy fans and Bryan Adams fans. There are fans out there who know more about your music than you do.
Yeah.
And this song was called Legendary Child, and it was never released. And I don't know how Aerosmith fans knew about it, but I'd get these emails once in a while. Whatever happened to that song? Is it ever going to be released? And I just would reply, I've never heard anything more about it. I think it's just, it's never going to be released. Anyway, about 6 or 7 years ago, I get an email from an Aerosmith fan in South America saying, congratulations, Legendary Child has been released. It's actually in the new Bruce Willis movie. No, really? Normally my publisher would alert me to these kinds of things. But so I checked into it, and there it was, Legendary Child, Bruce Willis movie, written by Steven Tyler and Joe Perry. I went, wait a minute. So I called Aerosmith manager, Trudy Green at the time, and I said, I co-wrote that song with Steven and Joe, but I'm not credited. And despite my long history with Aerosmith, she was really not very nice. And she said, prove you wrote it. What? Like, she treated me quite shabbily.
That's unfortunate.
So literally, I went in my basement and went through boxes of cassettes. I used to label them, and I found the cassette. Remember I told you I used to record everything?
Yeah.
I found the cassette of the little things I recorded while Stephen and Joe and I were actually writing that song. And so I made an MP3 and emailed it to her. And Stephen phoned and, lovely, apologized, said, sorry, no harm intended. We just forgot,
Yeah.
So thank God for recording everything.
Yeah. It's handy to have those records sometimes.
Yeah.